Hi, this is Kate McKinnon from Contemporary Geometric Beadwork, and this is part 3 of a series of videos describing an exploding podcast set that we're demonstrating in the second week of September of 2019. This section won't make a lot of sense to you if you haven't seen parts 1 and 2 of the exploding podcast set videos, so go back and have a look at those if you need to understand how we got to this point where we have this delightful little moon lander that actually will turn out to be the start of a hyperbolic bangle on top of a little podcast bead. So my podcast bead was 22 points. I'm making the medium size and I'm about ready to start the third section, the Rick-Rack Bangle. So I'll just get right into it. I won't do a lot of explaining of history here because this is kind of a long round and I don't want to make a terribly long video. So what we're going to do to start this stitch is get about 1 meter or more of thread on your needle, put a stop bead on the thread, and then just come up through one of the beads at your edge. And see, I actually go through the stop bead several times and it keeps it in place. We're going to cut this thread later. This is part of an exploding set, and so there's no problem here with just leaving that bead out in the air. And we're going to place all 6 beads of the Rick-Rack side here because remember, we are sketching this out in the air. And so for this first section of Rick-Racking, there will be just an all increase round. And you know how to do this because this was one of the rounds of the hexagon increase. Increases on every point. And so I'm going to differentiate between increase points and decrease points in this form to help people keep track of what they're doing. So right now I'm going to put in 5 of these beads, and this will be the regular body of the Rick-Rack. And then when I get down to another tip, which we'll call the decrease tip, right, then I will put in specially colored beads that will represent the decrease. And in this way we can track the decrease points and you can see the structure grow. Increases you already know about, but let's talk about decreases. So the Rick-Rack has alternating increases and decreases. So this is an increase point and I'll be coloring it just like the rest of the fabric. And when I come down here, this will be the first of my decrease points, and I will be coloring it separately. This is something that I find difficult to do only because I'm not that kind of beader. I'm not attentive to patterns, and so if I'm trying to color a decrease stack in a straight start like an emerald start or a peyote start, I do very poorly because I need to remember as the thing comes up in sequence. But because these are all stacked up in a little folded form, it's really easy to tell when you get down to a zone in the pattern where you're supposed to take a special action. You really only need to remember to do this the first time, and then every time after this it will be obvious because it will be your neighbor. So remember, I'm just sketching out the first round of Rick-Rack here in the air, essentially, because this thread will be removed. I'm just taking advantage of this edge to temporarily copy it. We call this tactic, this casting tactic, the cat burglar of edges technique. Now, I've decided to call out my decrease lines with gold beads, so just for a minute here, I'm going to match my casting model a little bit, but you won't be confused. Once you're to this point in the set, you're starting to really understand its structure. You know that these gold beads are a part of my Rick-Rack. So now I'm going to place the other 5 beads in this little leg or stick or side, and then you'll start to see what's going on here. The last bead of one of the last beads, or one of the beads on each edge from each side, is going to be an increase and the other is going to be a decrease, and they're going to be different colors and it's going to be beautiful. So my next point will be 2 blue beads or whatever the fabric color of the piece is. So up I go again, and like I say, this is a long round. This whole round might take anywhere between 40 minutes and an hour, just depending on the intricacy of your pattern. In fact, it might take even more than that if you're deliberately doing a complicated pattern. Nico Williams, who is here beading with us now, has said that some of his patterns, you know, I mean, they take much longer than you'd think. He may spend many hours working on a pattern on a triangle and be exhausted after. Some patterns are demanding and others just flow. So don't criticize yourself if you think these rounds are taking too long. Instead, I would say take your time and enjoy the process. This is one of the most beautiful pieces of architecture we've ever made. And the thrill that you'll have when it's coming off will be even thrillier if your craftsmanship is good and you've paid attention to your stitches. So give yourself to it. So this first round is the only round that will be all increases. And the only reason these are all increases again is because we've decided that in all of our sizing groups, we want 6 bead sides for our Rick-Rack. The math that I did for the sizing of the small, extra small, medium, and large, that was based on everybody making a Rick-Rack with 6 beads per side. So I say go with it, and just go with me on this if you don't mind, and make your Rick-Rack 6 beads per side like I'm doing. It doesn't matter how many beads are in your center ring. That way we can get a really good experiment going. We'll all have a symmetry of build, and then we'll be able to evaluate this form and see how well it actually works for you in different things that you'd want to build. All of us have at least 2 Rick-Rack sizes: straight bracelets with a clasp, and then bangles. And then within the bangle category, you have more sizes because you need to know how wide the cuff is going to be before you can determine the size that you need. If you want to make a very tall cuff, you may need to go up as many as 2 or 3 sizes from normal just to be able to accommodate being able to get your hand through the cylinder all at once. So every size is doing a 6 bead Rick-Rack, and that's a different number of edge beads for each of the 4 groups. So I'm just going to go around this little pod and fill in these points. I'm going to put gold beads at the bottom of the decrease points and fabric beads at the top of the rest of these points. So everything will be blue except these gold tips. So I'll have 11 gold tips and 11 blue tips for my 22-point form. So I'll be back with you when I finish this round. I'm coming up on the end of my first round now. And indeed, if you're going slowly, paying attention, it'll take between 45 minutes and an hour. And, you know, each round, we do 12 rounds from. This Rick-Rack is going to be a project that you do over several days of work, probably. We'll see. Some people are much faster, but I'm a little bit contemplative when it comes to Rick-Rack. So this section takes me a little while. Now, as I come back down to the bottom, this is these are the gold tips. So you're placing blue tips on one set of increases and gold tips on the other set. And now we've really defined sides. We have one side and the other side. We have the blue side and the gold side. And now you see me stepping up. Let me move my stop bead here so you can see what I'm doing. Now you see me passing through 2 beads here to step up to the next round. And so now my thread's coming out of the blue bead, and my little stop bead, which is also a deconstruction bead, I can snip off and help get this off, will be tucked behind as I continue to build along. So I'll just hold it out of the way as I go along. And normally I would move my step up a little bit. I like to go through a few beads when I step up, but in this case, remember, this is an exploding set, and there's no point in building in complexity like that. And so I don't think that's a good idea. I just have to dig that thread out. There'd be a big problem. So do not pass back into the previous section for any reason. Once you have a few rounds on here, you can start getting crazy if you feel like reinforcing or adding elements. But for now, we'll just calmly bead ahead and trust that you won't have any problems in deconstruction, and you won't. This is going to be fantastic. We'll show you all our tricks. So right now, we're just starting round 2 of the Rick-Rack then, right? And we're going to continue on with the gold tips and the fabric colored tips. But the tips of the decrease points are going to move up along with the Rick-Rack, because remember, with the Rick-Rack, however high it gets, it's still only 6 beads in every round. So what happens is the fabric grows taller. So at some point, this Rick-Rack will begin getting taller than the podcast bead, but the valley will be moving right up along with it. So I'll show you how that works when we get to the next decrease point. It's pretty neat, actually. So I'm going to do this round in a slightly darker blue, right? Yeah. And I'll put 2 increase beads because this is my increase side. Two increase beads, and then place the side beads, 4 side beads, and then it's time for the crotch, the valley here. And so what we're going to do is place a gold tip as the last bead of our 6, and we're just going to then pass back through the previous tips from the previous round. And let me show you close up how this works. When you get to the end of the round, after you've placed your gold tip to mark the end of your 6 beads, then you just pass back through this tip that you've already finished, and that's a decrease stitch. And then you place your other gold tip for this 6 bead run, right? You see how this works? Your 6 bead count just moves up 1 every time and extends up into the air. So this is the tip right here. These are the tips of this round, and these that we just passed through were the old ones. They were the tips of the other round. So if you think of the decrease like that, it really makes a lot of sense. It demystifies it. We're just moving the same 6 beads up the ladder, and so we're passing through a different set of beads every time, and each time those are the last 2 beads of the previous round. And although it looks a little awkward on the second round, it's really going to be nice when they start coming together. As these tips get pulled together, as it moves up, it's no longer sprawling and strange. Instead, it becomes really very in line. So don't worry, we'll do all of this together. And I'm just going to continue on with a few more points so that you can feel confident at each tip. Again, we have the growth points, the increase points will, in my colorway here, are fabric colored. And in this case, this round is dark blue. And the other tips, the other 6 bead tips, are gold. And so increases at the fabric colored tips, and the gold points are decreases. So now I've got my blue increase tips, 1 bead on each side. I'm going to place my 4 peyote fabric beads. Oops. And you notice I turn my work a lot when I'm working, but that's just because it's what works ergonomically for me. I like to have good control of the podcast, of all the beads when I'm working. I like to be the one who decides what the tension is, you know, how the thread gets pulled. And so if I'm holding my beads in place, it's really convenient for me to feel like I'm the one in charge of the beads. Okay, so that's 2 increased beads at the tip. Those are my 2 blue beads at the increase. And these are my 1, 2, 3, 4 side beads. And now it's time for my gold tips. So I'll place 1 tip bead, right? And then here comes a decrease stitch. That tip is already finished. It's from the last round. I'm going to pass right through it. And then I'm going to place the gold tip bead. That's the first of the run of 6 on this side, as we're zigzagging here. And so you see, this is the first tip. This is the second tip. And when I come along in this round the next time, I'll put gold beads in this slot too, so that'll be the 3rd tip. And so now I'm going to place 4 blue side beads, just regular peyote side beads, and then I'm going to place the blue tips, and I'm going to continue doing this all the way around the piece, and it'll take me another, you know, somewhere between a half an hour and an hour.